Kia ora, everyone. Welcome. We are really excited. We have Susan and Nigel with us today for the korero, and I'll get us going with a karakia. So, karakia timatanga, manaki tia teine hui, manaki tia teine ropu, manaki tia teine whānau, tainoa ki teine kaupapa, arahina na korero, arahina na patai, arahina na ture nei, kia puta ai te maramatanga. So bless this meeting, bless this group, bless this family as we come together, guide the discussions, guide the questions, guide the intent so that we move on to greater understanding. It is a really, really apt karakia for today because we've got Susan and Nigel with a wealth of knowledge who are going to be sharing with us about their Te Ara Whakamana Framework. So I'm going to just quickly do a little introduction first, but then we would love to hear from you, Susan and Nigel, a little more about you, okay? Whatever you want to share.
Definitely.
So, we've got Susan Ngawati-Osborne from Ngāti Te Ara, Ngāti Kopaki, and Ngāti Hine, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Ako Solutionz. Susan has a strong background in social and Māori community work and has worked as a community trainer in the Te Tiriti or Waitangi space. And she's also worked as a Kaupapa Māori practitioner in the sexual violence and family harm sector. So she currently serves as a trustee for her Marae, is active in her whānau, hapū and iwi spaces. And then we've got Nigel Marshall here, the other half. Nigel is New Zealand Pakeha, originally from England, and he is also the director for Ako Solutionz. He has had a lifelong career in the education space, working with children with additional needs, and he's worked as an RTLB for many, many years. He's got a real good appreciation, understanding of the challenges that our children face in the education space, also our kayako space, face in this education space. And also he's got a deep appreciation of the strengths of the Te Ao Māori approaches, and he's really good at weaving them through with the neuroscience-based sort of, perspectives and approaches. So yeah, we're really looking forward to hearing from you about Te Ara Whakamana, but also how did the journey get started? Like, where did it all begin? How did it conceptualize? I've honestly been really curious about it. I've loved what you do. And I've seen what you do, and I know, you've had evaluations and stuff like that, but I would love to have a peek into the, backstory of how it all started and began. But look, firstly, tell us a bit more about yourselves. Kia ora and welcome.
Getting the elbow here. Kia ora, Brianna. It's lovely to be here. And he mihi nui kia koutou. Those of you that are arriving in for tonight's Zoom, it's really lovely of you to give up your time just to hear us prattle on really about something we're really passionate about. Ko nā toki matawhāoro e te waka, ko te pā te maunga, ko manga peru te awa, ko te reto te whare e tuana, I roto I te takiwā o Ngāti Hine. Ko Susan Ngawati-Osborne hau, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. So that's a little bit about me. Whakapapa to the north, a beautiful place called Moerewa, where on my mum's side, I was really been very privileged and fortunate to have been part of a very large whānau, and essentially that's guided my life and my mahi to where I am today. So I think it's pretty important that you know that about me before we go on. But as Brianne said, so I've had really a lot. Probably my driving experience comes from the kaupapa Māori sector, and working through a framework that is totally inclusive, that really focuses on mana and all of the concepts surrounding that ensure inclusion, and that just gets everyone to look through a different lens about themselves and in their lives, which is always positive, affirming, uplifting, and yeah, something that I think should be shared, and particularly in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I think it's had this Chao Māori view of the world has had a pretty rough ride in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's been subject to the forces of colonisation, which has had a huge impact on how Māori experience the world, and not just how Māori experience the world, but how others in Aotearoa see Māori. And I think that's been, something that we've been trying to shift through this kaupapa as well, just moving along. So that's what my whakaro that I bring to this space, but Nigel has his own too.
Well, kia ora, everyone. Kia ora, Stephen. I can see you there. Okay, 2009 was after doing some training. I won't mention which one it was. There was some really good aspects to it, but we were left feeling it was missing a whole lot of stuff, basically. And so when I moved up to Auckland, to West Auckland, there was a group of us, about 6 of us, who decided we wanted to do something different within education. And so we met basically once a week, just plotting it out. And it was one of those magic moments, I think, where you got a group of people all with different ideas and skills and whatnot, that we were able to join together and create something, which was really fantastic. At first, the focus was on dealing with bad behaviour in the classrooms, because at that time, in about 2009, there was a spate of violence against teachers in classrooms. And that's been fine, but as time's gone by, we've really seen that this isn't something it doesn't work in isolation. It has to be a systemic kind of approach, and more than that, it wanted to be something which spoke to everybody. When you look at bad behaviour, we have to look at the context where that bad behaviour came from. And I think we have to own it as educators, that we're probably part of the reason why the bad behaviour is happening. So it's kind of, the neat thing about this is it's a journey, as you say, and we've benefited from everybody that we've talked to, that we've worked with, who's trained us, and who we've trained along the way. So it actually continues to be a really exciting, probably the most exciting part of my career, basically.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. What you mentioned earlier, Susan, was really interesting, that colonization has not only impacted how Maori experience the world, but also how the world, others view and understand Te Ao Māori. And I always draw a lot of parallels from that kaupapa with my personal experiences in the disability space. So until I had my own children with disabilities, I honestly did not know or understand what marginalization could look like, and it's something that has actually helped me understand what colonization how badly it can impact, people and cultures. So I think it's a really interesting thing. And again, how the world views those who are marginalized, how we focus on the deficits, or how we focus on, all the gaps, so to speak, that are highlighted, rather than the strengths and abilities, is so sort of, prevalent for all our marginalized sort of groups. So yeah, that's really, really interesting. And I always know a lot of the work that happens in this space comes from that personal, experience and personal, I guess, drive to change the world, and shift, communities and systems. And I love what you're doing, not just looking at sort of shifting one aspect, one behavior, one incident at a time, but shifting, the cultures within schools.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about what is it? How did you go about creating the whole Te Ara Whakamana framework, and the whole program, the delivery, and how has it actually impacted, schools? I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, I think it was, with Nigel's focus in education, it was a natural, there was a couple of things that drove it as far as our decision to take it into schools that was where we were going to get the biggest reach, especially for affected children. But we knew from the kaupapa that this works for everybody.
Yes.
So we were pretty confident about that. And the model is centered in the Māori creation story itself, which isn't all that widely known. I think a lot of people may have vaguely heard about it. And that was part of the colonisation process, where Māori beliefs and values, ways of seeing the world, had a bit of a lid put on it. People didn't want to know that because the focus was more on the dominant culture and the beliefs and values that dominant culture brought with them too. So that was a pretty significant impact. So in deciding to centre our model in Te Ao Māori, in the Māori creation story in particular, which we knew just through feeling, I guess, that sort of gut feeling like, oh, wow, we can really do that. We can really go here. And that decision, really, we struck gold.
I think I've been thinking about it like when it came to creating the model, it was like dreaming something, where you've experienced and you've learned a whole lot of stuff. And I don't think we actually there were certain aspects that were definitely directly related to academic research. But a lot of it, as Sue said, was a kind of gut feeling. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think, that ability to dream or create stuff is actually a powerful way of processing things, and making it happen. But on the other hand, at the same time, the more we've gone along, the more we've found, especially in the realm of neuroscience, a whole lot of stuff which validates our approach. Like take, for example, the idea of including storytelling as a big part of it. The research now on storytelling as a powerful medium is fantastic, and so we've kind of fell into it.
Yes. And it's interesting how storytelling is now actually being looked at as a way to be more effective in communicating and in so much of the work that people do. So yeah, you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, it can be quite frustrating to Fian for Māori, or for Māori that have known and lived in this way, have heard these stories and understand the impact and the reason behind them. It can be sort of quite frustrating to have something as new as neuroscience, because it's relatively new, and hallelujah for it, thank goodness. But it does validate this, I guess it puts it into an ecological model, neuroscience, and it certainly does validate the cultural markers that we're putting forward and saying how significant they are for working with in a trauma-informed way, or working with neurodiverse people, or anyone actually. But I guess the difference is that from an Indigenous perspective, this isn't new information. This is ancient, beautiful genius carved out from a culture that's been dominated by another culture who just hasn't seen it.
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
so it can be a little bit frustrating for some who just can't be bothered having to explain all this to
Yeah.
people. But that's not where we come from. We're out to kind of break that dominance through understanding, through teaching understanding of how to apply this knowledge. Because it's not just the knowledge, it's how to apply it in a way that's super effective.
I think that's a really good point, is that within the model, there's a lot of structure and process or protocol, if you like. And I think a lot of the time we come across great ideas, but how to apply it in our practice is what's often missing. And I think this is what this model does, is it gives you a process, a structure to follow, and that makes it really effective, you know.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting how you said it can be really frustrating for Maori. And just going back, so I grew up in India. I migrated here in 2001. And I remember in the early years, sort of, I was studying EC, and you know, anything Te Ao Maori was so different for me, and you know, so new for me. I always respected and realized I needed to, you know, adopt and learn Te Ao Maori into my practice, but I didn't understand fully the why or the actual benefits of it in terms of, you know, like you say, the through that neuroscience lens, the developmental lens. I actually didn't fully understand it in the early years. And it was very interesting, Susan, bit by bit over the years, I have had to make sense of it all through all these other lenses and perspectives. And so when I sort of, you know, was looking at setting up NATINA with everybody else, and we were talking about, you know, what do we want to do when we first set up? In my head, I was like, I want to highlight the parallels between the Western perspective of trauma-informed neuroscience-based approaches and the indigenous sort of, you know, perspectives. I was so excited about that because for me, it was like, oh my gosh, like, you know, they're both supporting each other, they're both validating each other. And so for me, it was really a way of helping people understand there's so many practices that are already there that we can adopt, you know, through the Te Ao Maori sort of spaces. And it doesn't just allow us to uphold Te Tiriti or Waitangi, it also allows us to work on our well-being, to work on inclusion, to work on, you know, so much of the good stuff that we want. And it was very interesting, my journey in sort of advocating for my children. I started out with disability rights. And I was like, you know, disabled children have a right to inclusive education, you know. And then I was like, well, not everybody buys into it. And I thought, okay, like there's research on inclusion that, you know, needs to be sort of valued and adopted. And then my third sort of pillar had been, well, there's actually Te Ao Maori, you know, that supports inclusion in such lovely ways. And there's all these values, principles we talk about in schools, you know, manakitanga, kotahitanga. And I'm like, we've got to use all of that to, again, support inclusion. And then I guess the fourth one eventually sort of came along was, you know, when I started learning about trauma-informed approaches and neuroscience approaches. And I thought, well, they all support inclusion. They all support, you know, uplifting the mana of all our children, all our people. So I really love it. I'm gonna veer off. Tell me a little bit, because this is the other thing that has been really sort of bubbling in my head. You know, I've been looking more into sort of somatic approaches, so the body up approaches to resetting and regulating the nervous system. And it's very interesting when you look at sort of regulating the vagal nerve and all that sort of stuff. I just think things like, you know, the waiata and all that singing, humming, toning up the vagal nerve, and you know, even things like using rakau, kapahaka, the movements, and you know, giving you that repetition and predictability. And it all really does sort of support all of that, doesn't it? And this is just in my head, sorry. So
No, you're right. You're right.
but for me, that's how I think. I think like there's so many of these practices that are there for regulating, that are there for not just connecting community, but actually for regulating our nervous systems. That's how I sort of see it as. Tell me more about it.
Well, no, you're bang on. It's certainly. I just want to say too that I think actually it's pretty. It's cool to be Māori everywhere else in the world except here. I just want to make that when it's sort of the world view. I think the world is far more looking with unbiased eyes on Māori. We always have we have this legacy that we really need to get rid of. Just lift it off and allow well-being to flourish. Everybody's well-being to flourish, and I think that's the hard part. I just wanted to say that the hard part. I see colonization like a big hat that sits on everybody's heads in Aotearoa, and the vision I have is for that hat to be taken off. And what happens then? And this will have parallels to you. What happens when that hat's lifted off? What does it expose? You know, other than kind of beliefs that are fairly self-serving for one sector, and for another sector that looks like liberation. So, you know, as far as sort of future-wise going forward, that's what we're working for. We're actually working for that, the vision of Te Tiriti or Waitangi, where we do have that amazing partnership, and for people to become more aware of the value and the richness in Te Ao Māori and what it brings, which is just referring back to your point of, hang on a minute, all of these activities, all of these vibrations from waiata, from karakia, from karanga, from, you know, they're all impacting on us in a way that, you know, really serves particularly neurodiverse people, but also calms and restores. So these cultural healing pathways really work for everyone. And the more we get to know and explore and develop these, the better we are, that from that Indigenous perspective. And I see, you know, the sort of westernized view as catching up, you know, because it's had its own legacy of trauma that it needs to come to terms with and heal before it can shed its skin and metamorphosize into something truly beautiful for its own people. But I just feel that the more we look for guidance from Te Ao Māori, the better everyone's going to be for that, especially living in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I think it's a prerequisite. But the interoception sort of parts of what we try and connect with in the model. I'm just going to talk about the kind of, with trauma-informed practice, the window of tolerance, for example, that we try and expand and grow. We can do that using these approaches, which are mana enhancing, because, and you know, when we have a mana conversation, we're talking autonomy, we're talking personal empowerment, we're talking a deep level of respect and inquiry. I'm just going to mention the term ako. How we explore knowledge with one another is basically we never the complete bird over anything. We learn and grow and develop from the people that we interact with. So that concept of ako is another guiding principle. And I think that that principle by itself lends itself to just such an inclusive process that brings everyone to a level of equity.
Yes.
And a lot of people sort of understand or think they understand the term equity, but until you apply a process which truly aims for an equitable outcome, then I think we're just still skirting around the edges.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, what you mentioned about colonization and how it impacts all of us, not just Maori. One of the things I've started realizing more and more as I've sort of adopted more of the trauma-informed approaches, worked on my own sort of, personal journey. What I've realized, how much I am led by the Western dominant view of constantly performing at 100%. It has taken me so long, I've got it here. I still find it hard to put it fully into practice. And I really, really admire the slower pace and the restorative spaces that are really valued in the indigenous cultures. And for me, it's like, I want to get there. I want to do this. But, I'm so programmed, not just in my head, but obviously in my nervous system as well. It's so hard to break free of that, and there's so many other little bits like that around, that sort of Western worldview that we sort of focus on and we just imbibe. I'm not even, Western as such. I'm Indian, but I am so influenced by it. It is such a dominant worldview, and yeah, it does impact all of us. So I love the work you're doing. And the other thing I wanted to say is I love how you've talked about mana as autonomy. And, when I look at it through my disability rights sort of, lens, I think that's what it is. It's all in that, UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled People. It's about your choice to live where you need to and want to, choice to, have the supports in the way that you choose and wish to. And, in a real personal context within our home, what I've realized with my oldest son and my second son, both of who have sort of, high support needs, when they don't have autonomy, their behavior escalates. When I consciously make sure I'm allowing space for them to have autonomy, to have choices, and supporting them actively to have that autonomy, that behavioral challenge, that you express, you see the distressed behaviors, it all sort of starts coming down. And I think my challenge has been, I've understood it, and as a parent, I've started sort of making sure I'm doing more of it, but not everybody around them believes that's the same, or that's needed. And it's hard, even within family, it's like, oh, well, don't let them get away, or, don't, you need to be the boss and you need to be the parent. And it's so hard to help understand that actually, if he doesn't have autonomy, he's not going to, be regulated. He's not going to be able to participate effectively. So that's a really interesting point you've said, mana is about.
I think so, Fiona, because what we've created with Te Ara Whakamana is a process for that to happen in. Yeah. So it's not really a free for all.
Yeah.
There's definitely obligations and responsibilities that go with autonomy.
Absolutely.
And that's a learnt thing, that's a taught thing. Yeah. And it's taught both, from instruction, but also from modeling. Yes. Role modeling. And yeah, I think people are a little bit scared oh gosh, if we give them autonomy, how are we going to cope, with all that autonomy, right? Of them doing and being and saying. But yeah, I just wanted to say that there are boundaries around that.
Yes.
And they're boundaries that are embedded deeply in respect.
Yes.
Respect for the individuals. So that's a two-way street. And this is how we learn to treat one another and to be with one another. Again, there's so many guiding concepts that come with that, just simply around whakapapa, around us acknowledging, of course, our ancestors, and seeing the continuation of life through the ancestors, and working in a way which is constantly seeking that balance, towards progressing your own autonomous ideas and identity and aspirations, and being respectful of others around you.
Yes.
So as you do that, and so I think I couldn't think of anything worse than to be dealing with all of this on your own. It's definitely a collective response. And I think that's why when we train in schools and organisations, we say this is school-wide, this is organisation-wide. We can't have anybody sort of going off on their own waka, so to speak, and disrespecting others. So it's a kaupapa, if I can say it like that, which has its own tikanga, kawa, ways of being and doing that have been, set to ensure the well-being of everyone. And I think that's what gives confidence to apply it. I think a lot of people don't have confidence. That's why we're so reliant on this dominant view that keeps telling us how to be and do, and to release that hold that it has on us. As you were speaking, I was thinking about the maramataka, and being guided more from around the cycles of the moon, and those sorts of concepts make you slow down. That whole concept of space and time, that has been, again, sort of imposed upon us from another cultural view. And now we have another one that we could possibly live by. Wow. That's exciting.
Absolutely.
I find it exciting.
There's this really hilarious sort of incident that had happened many years ago. So somebody I worked with, this lovely, lovely, absolutely lovely Maori wahine, she's a friend of mine. When we first started meeting, we were polar opposites. And so I was the one, go, 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 get things done. And she was a lot more chill backed and relaxed. And she was struggling when she first sort of started working. And one day we had this real, frank, honest conversation. And she said, I'm really trying my best. And I find it so hard to sort of keep up with you. It's amazing how you, get everything done. And I said, are you crazy? I said, you're amazing because you're so relaxed. And I said, I'm trying to be like you and I'm finding it hard. And I said, please do not admire anything that I'm doing. I said, you're the one who's got it right. And it was really interesting because in her head, she's thinking, I've got to, she's coming new and she's going, I've got to work this way. And I'm like, this is just me because I know nothing else. This is how I've been for so long. And I think a lot of it does come down not only just that Western worldview, but also, being a parent of 3 children, who have additional needs. And there's so much more that you have to do. And I'm realizing now as my kids are growing up, I'm like, I don't have to, I've got better supports now. I've got things in place, but it's just that nervous system's wired in that way. And it's so hard to sort of let go. So I love what you said, having something to, again, I guess, anchor ourselves to, I would say, like, and then sort of make sure that you're working in alignment and pacing yourself with it would be so awesome. So that's really lovely way of looking at it, Susan. Really, really lovely.
Can I bring us back to that
Yes.
idea of autonomy? Because a good example of this, remember, there was one of the cases was, I think he was about a 9-year-old boy with quite severe autism, and he wrote his own plan about what he wanted to do, and that was to go, I think it was to the library or something like that. But the corollary to that was that somebody had to go with him to just make sure he was okay. Now, because it was his plan, he handled it fantastic. Just that confidence that he had that to accommodate other people's needs within it because it was his plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this also, like, it reminds me of, allowing that autonomy requires actually some thoughtful planning. And it really, I think as adults supporting our children, whether it's in the home, whether it's educators in the sort of, school or ET spaces, I think it's so important that we are proactive, isn't it? We're planning for creating that space for the autonomy. We're creating the boundaries to allow for that autonomy. And, it brings me back to years ago when I used to sort of have some really fabulous, lovely teachers for my kids. And I used to think, they're really lovely, they're really well-meaning. Then why is the inclusion not happening? Why are things sort of falling off? And I realized it wasn't lack of willingness or intent. I realized it was lack of planning. And so I used to then sort of do the prompting and go, oh, do we need to plan for this? Do we need to think about that? And when that sort of would happen, then things would sort of fall in place because I think being really conscious about not just the intent, but creating time and space to plan in advance and to proactively think about, how are we gonna make this happen is so important, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult still in a lot of schools, simply of how they're set up and the expectations put on teachers to perform in a particular way, fulfill particular objectives. And it doesn't, what I've seen over the years is that the setup has been like the same for hundreds of years.
Yes.
The whole environment set up, and teachers are supposed to perform in this environment, and all the kids who are in this environment, which is really kind of like, okay, this is what we think is the best we can possibly do for everyone. And there's very little ability to cater for individual needs in that space. So, I mean, I'm not just talking about those with, neurodiverse needs, but I think the whole thing's been set up for neurotypical without an understanding that neurotypical is only a part of a continuum, and yet it's dominating, and therefore it's not inclusive at all. So, a systems level approach is something that we're trying to introduce, and I think Nigel's been working a little bit on an individual sensory profile that accompanies everyone. So we're just taking the labeling out of, this is going to be good for neurodiverse kids, or this one's only for the naughty kids, or or the adults and things like that. Rather, the approach has to be, well, it has to work for everyone.
It's trying to come in with my Quaker saying, which is all the world is odd except for me and thou. And sometimes I think thou art a little odd also. We've sort of got the idea that we're all on a continuum. And in actual fact, the best thing to know is what is our individual strengths and needs. And if you go up from there rather than, I mean, we've learned a lot from the Western diagnostic approach, but it still is something which by and large is a deficit category, and it's also by and large not accessible in a lot of ways to the general population. It's uses terminology which is quite, what's the word, restricted in terms of who's got an education in that particular field, whereas a lot of these things are actually common sense, really. Absolutely. So that's where we're trying to bring things back to common sense.
We shift away from clinical language, clinical approach to, which I just want to stick on this one for a little bit. If we're dependent on these experts coming in to solve our problems, when those experts depart, it leaves everyone a little bit vulnerable. Absolutely. So we're trying to change that up by, first of all, believing that, with neurodiverse kids, that their parents really do know and understand them, and that we need to be listening primarily to them first, rather than go away and write up this little plan and give it to you and say, here, use it, see how you get on. It's so silly. It's back to front. We need to be working really, really closely with whānau, as close as we can to the people, taking into account and accommodating their needs, whether they be verbal or however they wish to communicate, finding out how they communicate, discovering how they learn, what conditions best suit them, so we can set them up for success. So there's the challenge, but I don't think we need a whole army of experts to do this. We need just carefully an inclusive process with whānau. I think that's the beginning step to growing capacity within communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing with experts is, like I always think, if we look at experts as being the only ones who can solve or help us, then there's so much inequity, because not everybody can even afford those experts. You can't even get into that space. And this is why one of the things I love is having spaces, networking spaces where we can learn off each other. And honestly, I've learned so much from people right since day one. I've learned from other parents. I've learned from other teachers, and that's exactly how I've grown. And so for me, it's always been about sharing back, giving back, and, you learn from others and you give back to others. That's the only way we can sort of really learn and grow and thrive, because otherwise, like you say, if we're reliant on experts, then we have a very narrow and very restricted sort of line of support, so to speak, And also, how do you think for yourself then? Like when the expert's gone, this incident happened, now today this incident's happening. If you haven't got those critical skills to think through and, make sense and sort of support the child, then what are you going to do? So I did I know I say when I started my journey, I was all about, let's get the right funding, let's get the right specialists, And within a few years, I realized it's not going to work, because specialists come and go, and it's the people around my children that are going to make things work or not work. And I realized it was all about building up the capacity of the people who supported my children, who were spending time with my children, and really shifting the attitudes and knowledge base for them more than anything else, so they could work more effectively. Susan, I know you've said there's lots of barriers in terms of how schools work, and that hasn't allowed. So what are some of the things that have allowed? What is it that has allowed for cultural shifts to happen in schools where you've worked, and where the Te Ara Whakamana Framework has been adopted? What is the difference between, I guess, the schools that have effectively adopted and made the shifts and that have failed to do so? What's worked and what's not worked?
I think leadership is key, Priyan. Where we have strong leadership with strong commitment
Yeah.
To this change, and what strong leadership does is bring everybody with them, you know, and also support those that might be struggling with it.
Yeah.
So where we've seen that happen, where it's just not an option
Yeah.
that we work in this way, we've seen amazing outcomes. And, you know, that's not Nigel and my work. That's the work of the people who are applying these concepts in the process and using Te Ara Whakamana, you know, to help them along the way.
I'm just going to think, you know, like as individual practitioners,
Yes.
when you're working on a case by case thing with individuals, you know, you count yourself pretty lucky or fortunate if you make an improvement in that person's life. But what we've seen and what's truly fantastic for us is like we worked in, this is one school in particular, which really had great leadership. It was in a very low decile area. They went from 250 referrals for behaviour a year to 0.
Wow.
Now, think about that in terms of an effective way of creating positive change. It's staggering, eh? I mean, it doesn't happen in every school. It's, you know, it's that peculiar mixture of great leadership in the particular environment or whatever, but it can happen, and it can happen on that scale, eh?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, I think that impact is not just on the children and the school, it's also on the families.
Absolutely.
You know, I hear from families so much, you know, around when their children are not valued, when their children are not accepted. It puts so much stress, and it's not just the emotional, psychological stress, but families also struggle because then there's so much of, you know, having to give up your work, you know, sort of, you know, you're going down that whole economic sort of challenges space as well. So there's so much you know, that impacts families in different ways when schools are not able to value our children and include them really well. My question is, you know, from a Te Ao Māori lens, what does inclusion mean and look like to you, according to your perspective? And can you actually share some examples of inclusion and neurodiversity from Purakau? Because for me, inclusion has, I've really, how do I put it, very organically through the, you know, Te Ao Māori sort of kaupapa that I have been exposed to, I've always got the sense of it is really inclusive. It is really, you know, looking at the collective well-being. I think that's one of the things, is the collective well-being, you know, he waka e ke noa, nobody gets left behind. But from your lens, you know, your lived experience and your authentic sort of cultural understanding of Te Ao Māori, what is inclusion? Is there even a term for inclusion? You know, how does it sit within that Te Ao Māori space, inclusion?
Yeah, I think it's addressed. You know, I think within Te Ao Māori we have processes and ways of engagement that ensure inclusion, like whanaungatanga, like the process of whanaungatanga, for example, which positions us as being very mindful of somebody's whakapapa, for example, and mana that's attached to that, that comes from your lineage, your cultural perspective. And I don't think there's a term in Te Ao Māori for disabled, because that would be putting a lens, a deficit lens on it, which would mean a diminishment of mana. So when we are working to uphold mana, we constantly, that's why I don't think there is a kupu for disability. In fact, I think that if there were instances of disability, it's seen more as a taonga. People are seen as, wow, what have we got here? And a challenge for everyone to meet, rather than something that's not seen as normal. I think, without going sort of too deep into the whole cultural philosophy, definitely if you're a child of the universe, then any expression of that universe is legitimate and needs to be valued highly. And I think in terms of a pūrākau, for example, I think of the story of Hape. You might have heard of Karanga Hape Road in Auckland.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a beautiful, and this is just one. I know there are where people with disabilities have been raised to rangatira level, and their disabilities is seen as a magical power that deserves to be honoured because they've overcome things in a certain way that no one else has to. So there's an obligation, I think, at a whānau hapū level that demands everybody's attention to make sure that that person is always afforded mana. So it's never seen in a deficit lens by anybody, and it doesn't matter how it presents itself. You are part of a whānau, you're part of a hapū, you're part of an iwi, you have ancestors, and they all have mana. So out of a sense of obligation to all of that, we combine to ensure that the well-being of everyone, and that includes the people that are closest to that person, they also have their status is elevated, and so people around them respond to that status. So it's quite the opposite from the legacy of how people with different needs would have been treated historically in barbaric ways. There's no accounts of that in Te Ao Māori.
That's amazing. I love the way you've put it, but it makes sense. Like, I know it's always happened, but you've actually explained why it happens. It's because of the mana given to the lineage. It's the mana given, to the differences and overcoming the adversity, which is really beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, and the whole process of whanaungatanga is about connecting us. It's like saying, oh, here's Frean, where does she come from? Who's her parents? I know them. They go back to the, So you make these connections to make sure that Frean has sons with special needs. Wow. The mana is afforded every step of the way. It's never taken away. In fact, it's enhanced by whatever circumstances you have. And that's that whole process of social cohesion, social well-being, a collective one.
Yes. I think that sense of belonging is something that I've always missed when, for my children. And I grew up in a culture where there was a lot more sort of connection, and also time, of course, the generation back in the day where everybody got out and played on the streets and all that kind of stuff. So that sense of belonging, and I really see that within Te Ao Māori there are more opportunities for having that happen because you have a lot more of the whānau events and iwi events and all of those sort of natural connections that allow for spaces. When I think about, for me, as somebody who's not so connected within my own community, I think if I had to go out and socialize, I had to plan, I had to do something to go out and, have those social connections. But you've naturally got within Te Ara Māori space, through the connections that whānau and hapū and iwi sort of bring. So that's lovely. Tell me, what would you classify as trauma-informed practices through a Te Ao Māori lens? And Nigel, you've got your sort of Western worldview, and you've got the neuroscience sort of, perspective and research and all of that as well. So where and how do you see those parallels, the synergy between the two sort of perspectives through your lens? Tell me a little about it.
I'll try. I think the one of the great things about Te Ao Māori is the processes and protocols and structure. And
Okay.
I think that those things like process and structure really work well for a lot of neurodiverse people, but they work well for all of us.
Yeah.
That's why, most cultures and religions all have structure and processes. They understand, in a sense, the human condition that, we tend to go astray quite frequently,
Yeah.
and that we need support and we need structures and processes to keep us on track. So I think that's kind of, and again, those things that you've mentioned, like, the incorporating singing
Yeah.
into your social events, what that does for us as a group, solidifies our commitment to each other.
Yeah.
Same with karakia, all those things like that are fantastic. And the neuroscience behind them, like we're just talking about it today, was, for example, taking the time to say a karakia before eating.
Yeah.
The neuroscience behind that was just that pause
Yeah.
before eating actually helps your body give it time to produce your digestive juices. So both your appreciation and your ability to digest that food are enhanced.
Yeah.
So it's a very healthy way of going about stuff.
Amazing.
And I
Amazing.
think also a classic when we were talking about it again today was when people came back from war, they would go through a process of what's the word? Cleansing.
Yeah.
Now a lot of our soldiers from, I think, Second World War and most recently the Vietnam War got nothing,
Yeah.
none of that. So there was a real ignorance about the need to put a protocol and a process in place to enable positive change to happen.
Mm. And that's where all the work started, the neuroscience based and the trauma informed stuff that Bessel van der Kolk has sort of, been doing, all started with Vietnam War veterans,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
trauma they experienced.
yeah,
And the other thing, you've just reminded me that we talk about how healing does not happen in isolation. It
right,
happens in the collective where you have safe spaces with others and the support of others, right?
yeah,
And I think, within Te Ao Māori, you have the collective there to support you.
yeah, totally. I
So
think
I
it's a
think
great example. I think
that's
the other thing I just wanted to mention was that put the plug up for um, when we talk about Pākehā.
yeah,
I think that we have to acknowledge that a lot of Pākehā actually come from an indigenous culture that was actually colonized themselves. And I'm thinking of the Irish and the Scots and the Welsh, for example, from my own home
yes,
country, that
yeah,
have gone through very similar things and
yeah,
lost their language, their land, and their whole cultural
absolutely.
processes. And I think this could be the beginning of a really exciting return for a lot of people to exploring their indigeneity, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And this a whole honestly the sort of journey in the last few years as I've been sort of looking at not just the trauma informed practice but also trauma informed approaches through the Te Ao Māori lens and in the whole importance of whakapapa and lineage like you say. And I've been thinking, I've got nothing. Like all I know is my grandparents. And
Mm,
even that, I don't know a lot. And I'm reflecting back on how my dad, bless his soul, he sort of passed away, but he was big on the lineage and he was big. And I remember as a kid when we had celebrations, we had family, and we would meet people we'd never met, and there was extended family who came around. And I think about it now, and I think that was awesome, but I didn't value it as a child. And I was like, who's that? We don't even know them. We don't meet them so often, As a child, I didn't value it fully. But yeah, he always sort of supported that whole thing about connections to family and valuing and making sure everybody was invited, and even if it wasn't that often, that collection, coming together as a unit, as a family, was so important. So yeah, it is some fabulous stuff. It's been so lovely talking to you guys. I know we've run out of time, but one last question, Nigel, and this is something that personally for me, I'm trying to figure out and navigate myself as well. So I would love to hear your thoughts. Um, as a tauiwi working in this space, what has it been like for you? And how have you, I guess, taken from the Te Ao Māori space, shared, and how have you managed that, being a tauiwi? What's that been like for you personally? I'm always second guessing myself, like, is this something I should look into? Is this something I should talk about? What's it been like for you?
Um, as a kid, I was adopted into a Scottish family, and that was all about clans. And so in actual fact, like, this is a bit glib, but the men wear skirts in Scotland. But no, seriously, the that whole connection of clan and family and stuff was very strong when I was a kid growing up. And I was supported hugely
Yeah,
that way.
nice, nice.
Well, it made an easy transition to living on the East Coast.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's lovely. That's lovely. Look, thank you very much. Before we close, what are your hopes and dreams for Aotearoa?
Okay, we've got a small farm, and we have woofers. And just recently, we had two come from Chile, and they are indigenous Chileans. And one of the first things they said, it's fantastic to be here because you uphold and honor things Māori. I mean, we were kind of looking at each other when they said that. But in comparison to a lot of countries, we have actually come a long way, and it's something we should be so proud of.
Amazing. Amazing.
And certainly continue. We've got some work to do yet, but I think, I think we're going through a particularly chaotic time, but out of that chaos can come really positive change. So we've all got to be thinking about that and planning for that.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
that's what we're hoping for.
But we can't wait for governments. We have to act as communities, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think this is what it is all about, isn't it? Grassroots up. And
Yes,
you guys
totally.
are doing fabulous mahi, shifting sort of that one school at a time, one space at a time. So thank you. Thank you so much for all the work you do, the mahi you do. And it has been so lovely just connecting with you. I remember when I first found out about you guys, I was like, oh my gosh, this is exciting. Somebody's doing something fabulous in this space. So thank you. Thank you so much for coming, sharing about what you do. And we look forward to having you at our conference soon. So yes, that'll be exciting. The first NATINA conference. And thank you for coming along. Thank you for agreeing to come along.
Thank you for inviting us, Jan. We love being part of this and progressing this as well.
Thank you.
Privileged to be with you.
Kia ora, kia ora. Look, I'll close us with a karakia, karakia whakamutunga, kia whakairia te tapu, kia wātia ai te ara, kia turuki whakataha ai, kia turuki whakataha ai. Haumi e, hui e, tai e.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.